The old farmhouse wasn't just a house. It was a promise whispered on the wind, a dream of escape sketched in peeling paint and overgrown gardens. For Sarah, Tom, and their daughter Lily, it represented new beginnings, a refuge from the city's clamor, a canvas for restoration, a place where Lily could chase butterflies under the vast rural sky. But dominating their slice of pastoral hope stood the ancient oak tree in the backyard. Majestic, yes, but its gnarled branches clawed at the sky, and its massive roots buckled the earth, casting a shadow that felt older and deeper than the house itself. Their dream was rooted here, but so, perhaps, was something else entirely. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely.
The moving truck groaned up the gravel driveway, exhaling diesel fumes into the humid summer air. Sarah stepped out of their packed sedan, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun, and breathed deep. It smelled of damp earth, wildflowers, and something else, something ancient and loamy, emanating from the colossal oak that held court over the backyard. "It's even bigger up close," she murmured, a thrill mixing with an unplaceable flicker of apprehension. Tom joined her, clapping dust from his jeans. "It's magnificent, Sarah. Think of the tire swing we could hang." He grinned, ever the pragmatist, already seeing projects where she saw atmosphere. Lily, released from her car seat, made a beeline not for the waiting porch swing, but for the base of the giant tree, stopping a few feet short, her head tilted, as if listening. The farmhouse itself was a charming, slightly dilapidated two-story structure, classic Americana with its wide porch and shuttered windows. Inside, the scent of old wood and disuse hung heavy. Sunlight streamed through dusty panes, illuminating swirling particles and the daunting scope of the restoration project. Leaky faucets, drafty windows, floors that sighed underfoot, these were the expected ghosts of an old house, the kind Tom could tackle with tools and tenacity. They spent the first few weeks in a whirlwind of unpacking, cleaning, and planning, the rhythm of hammers and saws filling the days. Sarah, an illustrator who worked from home, often set up her easel on the back porch, stealing glances at the oak while she sketched. It was undeniably beautiful, a titan of bark and leaf, its canopy a sprawling universe unto itself. Yet she couldn't shake a subtle feeling of being watched whenever she was near it. The sheer scale was part of it, but there was more, an unnerving stillness, a weight in the air beneath its boughs. The first anomalies were easy to dismiss. A patch of lawn directly under the oak's densest shade began to yellow, crisping, despite the sprinkler's reach in the rainy July afternoons. "Dense shade," Tom diagnosed, pointing at the thick canopy. "Probably changes the soil pH too. We'll test it later." Then Sarah noticed the birds. Sparrows and finches flitted around the yard, perched on the gutters and fence posts, but they seemed to give the oak a wide berth. No nests adorned its sturdy limbs, no cheerful chirping echoed from its leaves. It stood silent, save for the rustle of wind through its foliage, a sound that sometimes, in the quiet moments, seemed less like a rustle and more like a long, slow exhalation. Lily, meanwhile, developed a peculiar relationship with the tree. Some days she'd sit near its base, tracing patterns on the raised roots with a stick, humming softly. Other times she'd freeze mid-step on the lawn, her gaze fixed on the trunk, a little frown creasing her brow, before she scurried back towards the house. One afternoon, Sarah found her whispering intently to the gnarled bark. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Sarah asked gently. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. "The listening tree," she said, simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It has sleepy roots." "Sleepy roots?" Lily nodded solemnly. Under the ground. They don't like loud noises. Sarah smiled, ruffling her daughter's hair. Childhood imagination, she told herself, adjusting to the quiet, the space, the giant new friend in the backyard. She mentioned Lily's comment to Tom that evening. "Kids," he chuckled, prying open a paint can. "Did you see the state of the flashing up there?" Sarah forced a smile. Tom's practicality was usually a comfort, grounding her own tendency towards introspection. But the yellowing grass, the absent birds, Lily's hushed conversations with the listening tree, each felt like a tiny, discordant note in the symphony of their peaceful country life. They were subtle things, easily explained away in isolation. Yet, gathered together under the oak's heavy gaze, they began to weave a thread of disquiet, thin and barely visible, but undeniably there. The house held the manageable ghosts of wear and time. The tree, however, the tree felt like it held secrets. Secrets rooted deep in the old wood and the unsettled ground beneath.
August brought a stifling heat wave, the air thick and still, broken only by the drone of cicadas. Tom, determined to make headway on the exterior before autumn, decided to map out the line for a new picket fence along the property edge, a line that would run relatively close to the oak tree's sprawling drip line. He measured and marked, sweat plastering his t-shirt to his back. Near the oak, the ground was uneven, humped and furrowed by the visible network of surface roots. Finding a clear spot to drive a marker stake, he positioned his shovel. The blade bit into the dry earth with a satisfying crunch, then stopped abruptly with a dull thunk. Not the sharp ping of hitting rock. This was different, firmer, yet somehow yielding. Annoyed, thinking it was just a thicker, buried root, Tom applied more pressure, leveraging the shovel. There was a scraping sound, and then the object shifted slightly. Curiosity overriding his frustration, he knelt and began digging carefully around the point of impact with his hands and a trowel. The soil here felt different, cooler, denser than the surrounding earth. A few inches down, his fingers brushed against something smooth and hard. Not wood exactly, too smooth, almost polished by the earth. He cleared more soil, revealing a curved, yellowish-white fragment, maybe 6 inches long. It looked unnervingly like a piece of bone, old and weathered, but strangely preserved. A wave of unexpected coldness washed over him, prickling the sweat on his skin despite the oppressive heat. It felt wrong, deeply wrong. A sudden image flashed in his mind. Darkness, suffocating earth, the feeling of being trapped. He recoiled, snatching his hand back as if burned. Animal bone, he told himself firmly. Deer, maybe, or an old farm dog buried long ago. It was an old property. Finding things wasn't unusual. But the feeling lingered, a visceral unease that tightened his chest. Glancing around quickly, as if someone might be watching, he pushed the soil back into the hole, covering the fragment completely, tamping it down with the flat of his shovel. He marked the fence line a few feet further away from the tree, telling himself it was just a better spot. He didn't mention the discovery to Sarah. Why worry her over some old bone? That night, the heat wave broke, but not with the expected thunderstorms. Instead, a strange, localized frost descended upon the backyard. When Sarah looked out the kitchen window the next morning, coffee cup in hand, she gasped. A silver rime coated the grass and soil in a near-perfect circle around the base of the oak tree, extending out perhaps 20 feet, while the rest of the lawn remained green and dewy. It was mid-August. Frost was unheard of. By the time Tom came downstairs, the sun had burned most of it away, leaving only damp patches and a lingering chill in the air near the tree. Tom shrugged it off as a weird microclimate effect, maybe cold air settling off the dense leaves. Inside the house, other small disturbances began. The faucet in the downstairs bathroom, the one closest to the backyard wall, started dripping. But the water wasn't clear. It oozed thick, viscous drops, tinged with a faint brownish discoloration, like diluted mud. Tom replaced the washer, then the entire faucet assembly, but the sluggish, discolored drip persisted. And after sunset, faint yet pervasive earthy smells began to drift from the backyard, seeping under the back door. Not the pleasant scent of soil after rain, but something heavier, richer, like freshly turned grave dirt mixed with decay.
Lily, meanwhile, retreated into her drawing. Her usual colorful sketches of butterflies and their smiling family gave way to darker creations. Page after page featured the oak tree, rendered with startling intensity for a 6-year-old. Its roots weren't just roots. They were grasping claws or tangled snakes twisting deep into black earth. Beneath the tree, huddled, indistinct shapes lurked in the shadows. One picture showed a stick-figured girl, presumably Lily herself, standing near the trunk, holding hands with a tall, shadowy figure made entirely of swirling lines that seemed to merge with the tree's roots. Sarah found the drawings tucked under Lily's bed. She asked, "Who is this, sweetie?" pointing to the shadowy figure. Lily glanced at the drawing, then looked away, chewing on her lip. "That's Mr. Roots," she whispered. "He lives under the tree." "Mr. Roots? Is he your imaginary friend?" Lily shook her head, her eyes fearful. "He's not imaginary. He tells me secrets. Sad secrets." She wouldn't elaborate, snatching the drawing back and hiding it away. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the unnatural morning frost. Tom's quick dismissal of the bone fragment, the localized frost, the viscous water, the pervasive earthy smell, and now Lily's disturbing artwork and her talk of a sad figure living beneath the tree. The threads of disquiet were thickening, twisting together into a knot of dread centered squarely on the ancient oak and the unsettled ground beneath its imposing shadow. Something had been disturbed, and it was starting to react.
Sarah tried to reclaim the backyard, determined not to be intimidated by a tree, however ancient or imposing. She resumed sketching on the porch, positioning her chair so she could watch Lily play on the lawn, deliberately keeping her daughter within sight, but away from the oak's immediate vicinity. Yet, the proximity was unavoidable. The tree's presence permeated the atmosphere. While working, she began experiencing unsettling moments of profound, inexplicable sadness. It would wash over her suddenly, a heavy wave of grief that didn't feel like her own, clinging like the humid air before vanishing as quickly as it came, leaving her shaken and disoriented. Other times, a prickling anxiety would crawl up her spine, the distinct sensation of being observed, even when Tom was inside and Lily was engrossed in her play. The sounds changed too, or perhaps she was just noticing them more. The wind sighing through the massive crown of leaves sometimes took on a different quality. Faint, fleeting whispers seemed to weave through the rustling, too indistinct to be words, yet carrying an undeniable cadence of hushed speech or sorrowful sighs. She'd snap her head up, straining to hear, but there would only be the wind, the distant buzz of a lawnmower, the normal sounds of a rural afternoon. Tom, when she mentioned it, suggested it was the wind moving through different densities of leaves, or maybe the acoustics of the old house playing tricks. But Sarah knew, with a certainty that unsettled her, that the sounds originated from the tree itself. Her attempts to beautify the area near the oak met with unnerving failure. Wanting to add color, she bought vibrant marigolds and sturdy hostas, plants known for their resilience. She carefully prepared the soil a reasonable distance from the main trunk, outside the zone of the most visible roots, yet still within the tree's sprawling influence. The seedlings looked healthy going into the ground. By the next morning, they were utterly wilted, their stems blackened and limp as if scorched by frost, despite the warm nights. Established rose bushes planted near the edge of the oak's canopy developed a strange black blight that crept only up the stems and leaves facing the tree, while the sides facing away remained healthy and green. When she tried to dig deeper to amend the soil, thinking Tom's acidity theory might hold water after all, her shovel met resistance far sooner than it should have. The ground felt strangely compacted, cold to the touch, even on hot days, almost pushing back against her efforts. Feeling increasingly isolated by Tom's well-meaning skepticism and her own growing fear, Sarah sought out local knowledge. She remembered seeing an elderly man tending his immaculate garden a few properties down the road. A discreet inquiry at the local post office identified him as Mr. Henderson, whose family had apparently lived in the area for generations. One sunny afternoon,
bringing a basket of early apples from a smaller tree on their property as a pretext. Sarah walked over. Mr. Henderson was a spry man in his late 70s, with kind eyes netted in wrinkles and hands stained with earth. He welcomed her warmly, admiring the apples and offering her iced tea on his porch. Sarah steered the conversation towards the history of the area, eventually mentioning their own property and its dominant feature. "The big oak tree in our backyard is incredible," she said, trying to sound casual. "Must be centuries old." Mr. Henderson's friendly demeanor subtly shifted. His gaze drifted towards her property, though the tree itself was hidden by distance and other foliage. "Ah, the mother oak," he said, his voice lowering slightly. He didn't sound admiring. He sounded respectful, almost wary. "Aye, she's old. Older than any house round here. Older than the town, some say." "Mother oak?" Sarah asked. He nodded slowly, swirling the ice in his glass. "That's what folks used to call her. Generations back. My grandpappy told me stories his own gram heard. Said the tree was sacred ground long before the settlers came. Bad things happened if you disturbed her roots. Bad luck. Sickness. Worse." Sarah felt a cold prickle despite the afternoon warmth. "Worse?" Mr. Henderson leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are stories, mostly forgotten now. Whispers about the families who lived in your house before. Hard times. Folks back then were closer to the land, maybe felt things more. Talk of children. Children who wandered too close or got sick sudden-like." He hesitated, seeming reluctant to continue. "There was a tragedy long ago. A family named Blackwood, I think, lost 2 children in one winter. Folks whispered it was the land itself or the tree taking something back after they tried clearing too much near its base for farming. Nothing proven, mind you. Just old talk. Folklore." He straightened up, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Likely just a coincidence. Old houses have sad stories, don't they? Still," he added, his gaze locking with hers again, serious now, "I wouldn't go digging too deep around that oak if I were you. Some roots are best left undisturbed." Sarah thanked him, her mind racing. Folklore or a veiled warning based on buried history? Mr. Henderson's words, combined with the wilting plants, the cold soil, the whispers on the wind, and her own pervasive sense of unease, painted a disturbing picture. The mother oak wasn't just a tree. It was a landmark steeped in local dread, intertwined with forgotten tragedies. And they were living directly under its watchful, ancient gaze, having already, unknowingly, disturbed its slumbering roots. The unease that had flickered at the edges of their lives now began to seep into their nights, disrupting the sanctuary of sleep. It started subtly. Restlessness, difficulty drifting off, particularly in the master bedroom whose windows faced the backyard, offering a clear, moonlit view of the oak's imposing silhouette. Then came the nightmares. Sarah's dreams were filled with suffocating darkness, the feeling of damp earth pressing in, tangled roots coiling around her limbs like constricting snakes. She'd wake gasping, heart pounding, the phantom smell of soil lingering in her nostrils. Tom, usually a heavy sleeper, began tossing and turning, muttering unintelligibly. When pressed, he admitted to fragmented dreams of being lost in endless dark woods, the trees closing in, their branches like grasping arms. Lily's sleep was the most disturbed. She whimpered often, crying out small, fearful phrases. "Too tight. Let go. Mr. Roots is sad." One night, Sarah woke to find Lily's bed empty. Panic seized her until she found her daughter standing at the top of the stairs, facing the back door, her small hand reaching out as if towards the backyard. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her face pale in the dim light filtering from the landing. She was sleepwalking, heading towards the oak. Sarah gently guided her back to bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sleepwalking incidents became more frequent, always directed towards the backyard, towards the oak. Sarah started locking the back door bolt at night, a knot of fear tightening within her. The house itself seemed to be reacting, becoming porous to the oak's influence. On cool mornings, strange patterns appeared in the condensation on the window panes facing the oak. They weren't random streaks, but intricate branching designs that looked unnervingly like root systems etched in moisture, fading as the glass warmed. More disturbingly, fine dark grit began appearing inexplicably inside the house. Sarah would find small drifts of it near the back door threshold, along the baseboards in the living room, even once on the kitchen counter. It was fine and dark, like the soil near the oak's base, appearing even when no one had been in or out, as if tracked in by unseen, meticulous feet. She'd vacuum it up, scrubbing furiously, only for it to reappear days later. Tom's practicality, his shield against Sarah's mounting anxieties, was finally beginning to crack, eroded by the persistent, undeniable weirdness. The dripping faucet defied all his plumbing skills. The earthy smell lingered stubbornly in the evenings. Lily's sleepwalking terrified him. But the breaking point came during his inspection of the house's foundation. He'd been concerned about potential moisture issues on the side of the house closest to the oak. Armed with a flashlight, he was examining the old fieldstone foundation where it met the soil line. He noticed several thick woody tendrils snaking between the stones, far thicker and more aggressive than typical tree roots near a foundation should be. They looked disturbingly recent, pushing mortar aside with invasive force. As he leaned closer, probing one of the intruding roots with a screwdriver, he heard it, a distinct tap-tap-tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from within the dense root mass embedded in the foundation wall. It wasn't insects, wasn't settling noises. It sounded like something patiently knocking, wanting attention or entry. He froze, listening. The tapping stopped. He poked the root again. Tap, tap, tap. He jerked back, the screwdriver clattering to the ground. Then, as he stared at the invasive roots, a wave of intense, irrational anger washed over him. It wasn't directed at the damage, but a fierce primal protectiveness towards the tree itself. The thought of cutting these roots, of harming the oak's connection to the house, felt suddenly deeply wrong, almost sacrilegious. The feeling was so strong, so alien to his own thoughts, that it shocked him more than the tapping. He stumbled back from the foundation, breathing heavily, the strange anger slowly receding, leaving him confused and shaken. He looked up at the massive oak, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. It seemed to loom larger than ever, ancient and powerful. The tapping, the aggressive roots, the sudden inexplicable emotion. His logical explanations, his comfortable skepticism crumbled. He couldn't deny it any longer. Something was fundamentally wrong. The weird occurrences weren't isolated incidents or products of stress and imagination. They were connected, emanating from the old oak tree, from the ground beneath it, from the tangled roots that were now reaching insistently into their home and their minds. He finally looked at Sarah that evening, the usual dismissal absent from his eyes, replaced with a shared, dawning fear. "Okay," he said quietly, his voice tight. "Okay, Sarah, I believe you."
The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Tom's belief wasn't a comfort. It was a confirmation of the dread that had been coiling in Sarah's stomach for weeks. They were no longer just dealing with unsettling quirks. They were facing something active, something tied intrinsically to the oak tree, and, Tom now admitted with reluctance, likely connected to the object he'd disturbed and hastily reburied near its roots. Fear, sharp and urgent, propelled them. Fear for Lily, whose sleepwalking and fearful whispers about Mr. Roots were becoming more pronounced. Fear for themselves, caught in the creeping psychological and physical encroachment. They couldn't live like this, under siege by whispers and nightmares and unnerving manifestations. They had to know what was buried there. They had to face it. They chose a Saturday morning, a time when the sun was high, hoping daylight would offer some measure of courage, some buffer against the encroaching shadows. They gathered tools, shovels, a trowel, work gloves, a sturdy tarpaulin to place the excavated soil on. The simple act felt momentous, charged with trepidation. As they walked towards the spot near the oak strip line where Tom had hit the object, the air seemed to grow stiller, the usual sounds of the neighborhood fading into a tense silence. The cicadas hushed. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Lily watched from the kitchen window, her small face pressed against the glass. Sarah had tried to distract her with cartoons, but Lily seemed drawn to the window, her expression oscillating between wide-eyed terror and an unnerving blank calmness that worried Sarah even more. Tom located the spot, marked by a subtle depression where the soil had settled unevenly after his hurried reburial. He took a deep breath, exchanged a grim look with Sarah, and pushed the shovel into the earth. The ground felt immediately resistant, more so than Tom remembered. It wasn't just compacted, it felt reluctant, pushing back against the metal blade with a stubborn, almost living pressure. Each shovelful required more effort than it should have, the soil clinging to the shovel, dark and strangely cold. Sarah knelt beside him, using the trowel for finer work, her hands trembling slightly. The earthy smell, the one that sometimes permeated the house at night, rose strongly from the disturbed ground, thick and cloying, tinged with a faint sweetness like overripe fruit or funeral flowers. The wind, which had been unnaturally still, began to pick up, rustling the oak leaves above them. The whispers started, clearer now, seeming to swirl around them, fragmented sounds, sighs, indistinct murmurs that prickled the skin. Sarah could almost make out words, syllables lost just as they formed, like the echoes of forgotten conversations. "Keep going," Tom muttered, his jaw tight, sweat beading on his forehead despite the coolness emanating from the earth. He was digging faster now, driven by a grim determination. After about a foot down, the shovel struck something solid again. Not the small fragment Tom had found before, but something larger, flatter. Thud. Carefully, they cleared the soil around it. Dark, aged wood emerged bound with what looked like heavily corroded metal straps. It was a box. Small, perhaps 2 feet long and a foot wide, remarkably well preserved given its time in the earth. Thick, dark roots from the oak had woven themselves around and through it, embracing it tightly, claiming it. It wasn't just buried near the roots, it was entangled within them, as if the tree itself was guarding it. Working with painstaking care, using trowels and their gloved hands, they gently loosened the soil and prized the clinging roots away from the box. Alongside it, nestled deeper in the earth and tangled with another thick root, lay a scatter of small, delicate bones. Sarah's breath hitched. They were undeniably small, too small. Near them lay a single, tarnished silver locket, shaped like a heart. With immense effort, Tom managed to work the box free from the tightest grip of the roots. It was heavy, heavier than it looked. The wood was dark, almost black, and strangely smooth despite its age. The metal bands were pitted and rusted but held firm. There was no visible lock, but the lid seemed fused shut by time and pressure. Hesitantly, using the edge of the trowel, Tom pried at the seam where the lid met the box. A faint cracking sound echoed in the heavy silence. The wood groaned in protest. With a final heave, the lid splintered slightly and lifted, perhaps an inch, releasing a puff of stale, musty air that carried the scent of dried herbs and something else, something
indescribably ancient and sad. Peering inside, they saw bundles of faded letters tied with brittle ribbon, a few small carved wooden figures, perhaps primitive toys or effigies, and nestled amongst them, confirming the dreadful suspicion raised by the bones outside the box, lay another set of tiny skeletal remains, wrapped carefully in remnants of what might have been linen or wool. They were heartbreakingly small, unmistakably the bones of infants or very young children. Mr. Henderson's vague stories of lost children suddenly felt horrifyingly concrete. Sarah choked back a sob, stepping back from the hold, the locket unconsciously clutched in her hand. Tom stared into the box, his face pale, his earlier fear replaced by a profound, sickening understanding. They hadn't just unearthed old debris or animal bones. They had unearthed a tragedy, a secret burial entwined with the very roots of the ancient oak tree. And the mother oak, the silent guardian, did not appreciate having its sorrowful past disturbed.
The moment the box was fully lifted from its earthen cradle, the air fractured. A violent, localized wind erupted seemingly from nowhere, whipping only around the massive oak tree. It tore through the leaves with a furious roar, sending twigs and dust swirling in a vortex centered on the disturbed ground. The heavy branches groaned and scraped violently against the side of the house, the sound like claws tearing at the shingles. The sunlight seemed to dim, overshadowed by the tree's sudden furious agitation. Inside the house, a cacophony broke loose. Doors slammed shut on the upper floors with concussive force. The lights flickered wildly, buzzing erratically before plunging the back rooms into semi-darkness. Lily's terrified scream ripped through the air from the kitchen window, sharp and piercing. The earthy smell intensified exponentially, becoming a suffocating, cloying miasma, the smell of decay, wet soil, and something else, something sharp and green like crushed sap, offensively strong. The ground beneath Sarah and Tom's feet seemed to tremble, a low vibration traveling up through the soles of their boots, as if the vast root system beneath them was writhing in anger. Then came the psychic assault. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a barrage. Flashes of disjointed images flooded their minds, overlapping, chaotic. Sarah saw glimpses of a woman weeping, her face etched with grief, clutching small bundles to her chest under a moonless sky. She felt a wave of overwhelming despair, so profound it buckled her knees. Tom gasped, staggering back, seeing flashes of rough hands digging frantically in the dark, feeling a desperate, terrified urgency, a fear of discovery mixed with a terrible, resigned sorrow. Interspersed were flashes of childish laughter, abruptly cut short, followed by an aching silence. They were experiencing echoes of the past, raw and unfiltered, pouring directly from the disturbed site, amplified by the tree's rage. The grief, the terror, the protective fury of those who had buried the box, it slammed into them, disorienting and sickening. Lily's screams from the house took on a different quality. They weren't just screams of fear anymore. Words tumbled out, choked and distorted in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. High-pitched, frantic. "No, leave them, sleep now, save here, don't take them." It sounded chillingly like a mother pleading, desperate and heartbroken, channeled through their terrified daughter. Nature itself turned actively hostile around the epicenter of the disturbance. The roots in the exposed soil seemed to subtly shift and writhe, like awakening serpents. The air grew thick with insects, not just the usual summer drone, but swarms of buzzing flies and beetles, drawn inexplicably to the unearthed box and the hole. A squirrel chattered angrily from a lower branch, its movements jerky and aggressive, before darting down the trunk as if to defend its territory. The entire ecosystem around the oak felt charged, weaponized, bristling like a cornered animal. The mother oak, the root soul, wasn't just a passive entity, it was awake, enraged, and defending the tragic secret bound to its roots. Tom scrambled back, pulling Sarah with him away from the immediate vicinity of the hole and the box which lay exposed on the tarpaulin. The wind howled around the tree, a focused tempest that barely stirred the leaves on other trees nearby. The psychic pressure lessened slightly with distance, but didn't disappear, leaving them trembling, nauseous.
their minds reeling from the borrowed trauma. "We have to do something," Sarah cried over the wind's roar, her voice hoarse. "We can't just leave it like this." Tom stared at the unearthed box, then at the furiously thrashing tree, then towards the house where Lily's eerie cries continued. He understood now. They hadn't just dug up bones and relics. They had broken his seal, violated a sanctuary, however grim. They had disturbed not just the dead, but the powerful ancient entity intertwined with them, the guardian of their tragic rest. And it was demanding they answer for the trespass. The response was swift, violent, and terrifyingly personal.
The howling wind, the slamming doors, Lily's chillingly channeled cries. The oak's fury was a tangible force, pressing in on them. Sarah and Tom huddled near the edge of the porch, the unearthed box lying accusingly on the tarpaulin between them and the enraged tree. Panic warred with a dawning, dreadful understanding. They couldn't simply rebury the box and hope the entity would forgive the intrusion. They had seen inside, touched the relics, exposed the sorrowful secret to the light. The connection had been reforged, the trauma reawakened. "The letters," Sarah gasped, clutching the tarnished locket she'd picked up earlier. "Maybe they say what to do, what they wanted." Tom nodded grimly, his earlier fear solidifying into resolve. While Sarah kept a wary eye on the thrashing tree and listened for Lily, he carefully approached the box. The psychic pressure intensified as he neared it, flashes of grief and whispered pleas flickering at the edge of his consciousness. With trembling hands, he lifted out the brittle bundles of letters. The ribbons disintegrated at his touch. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but some passages were still legible, written in an old-fashioned, spidery script. He scanned them quickly, piecing together fragments. Words leapt out. "Our precious babes, taken by the winter sickness, cannot bear the cold church ground. Mother Oak will keep them warm, safe in her arms. An offering, peace beneath the roots. Do not disturb their slumber." It was a mother's desperate testament, a rationale for a secret burial driven by grief and perhaps older folk beliefs about the protective power of the ancient tree. An offering had been made, a pact of sorts, entrusting the children to the tree's care. "Appeasement," Sarah whispered, joining him, her eyes wide with fear and pity. "They wanted them left here, protected by the tree. We disturbed their rest." Mr. Henderson's warnings echoed in her mind. Bad luck, sickness, worse. Disturbing the roots, disturbing the offering. They had few choices, none of them good. Appeasement, rebury the box and the scattered bones immediately, perhaps with a token of apology. The locket, flowers from their own garden, hope that restoring the secret, honoring the mother's wish, would soothe the root soul. But would it be enough now that the seal was broken? Severance. Take the box and remains away entirely. Give the children a proper burial elsewhere, perhaps consecrated ground, as Mr. Henderson might subtly suggest. But this would mean ripping the children from the tree's embrace, potentially violating the pact and enraging the root soul beyond measure. It felt like a further desecration. Containment. An unlikely option. What could contain such ancient, rooted power? Iron? Salt? Rituals they barely understood? It seemed futile, temporary at best. "We have to put them back," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's what she wanted. It's the only way." She looked towards the house, towards Lily. "We need to show respect." Tom nodded, the decision settling heavily upon him. Appeasement felt like the least violating path, the one most aligned with the heartbreaking story unfolding from the letters.
As they prepared to return the box to the earth, the root soul seemed to sense their intention, its fury escalating into a final, terrifying crescendo. The wind around the oak intensified into a localized gale, ripping smaller branches free and sending them crashing down near them. Hail, impossibly generated from the clear sky above the tree, began to lash down in the immediate vicinity. The psychic assault returned with crushing force. Sarah saw vivid hallucinations, the ground opening up beneath her, roots snaking up to pull her down. Tom saw the foundation of the house crumbling, invasive roots tearing through the walls, reaching for Lily inside. Their deepest fears amplified and weaponized. The back door of the house flew open with a bang, and Lily stumbled out onto the porch, her eyes wide and blank, moving stiffly, unnaturally, towards the howling tree. "Mummy? Daddy? They're calling," she murmured in that same high-pitched, alien voice. "Lily!" Sarah screamed, breaking free from her paralysis and sprinting towards her daughter, grabbing her just as she reached the edge of the porch steps, seemingly compelled towards the writhing roots at the oak's base. Tom, meanwhile, acting on pure instinct, quickly but carefully placed the box back into the hole. He gathered the scattered small bones and the locket and placed them gently beside the box. He grabbed handfuls of the excavated soil, whispering apologies, fragments from the letters. "We're sorry. We'll let them rest, safe in her arms. Please." As he filled the hole, the phenomena reached their peak. The house groaned audibly, strained by the pressure of the roots. The wind screamed like a banshee. The air crackled with unseen energy. Sarah held Lily tight, shielding her daughter, whispering reassurances she didn't feel, bracing against the psychic storm. Tom finished filling the hole, tamping the earth down gently, reverently. He stood back, breathing hard, Sarah joining him with Lily sobbing against her shoulder. For a long moment, the tempest raged. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the wind began to subside. The hail stopped. The menacing scraping against the house eased. The psychic pressure receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a lingering echo of sorrow. The root soul wasn't gone, but it seemed to be listening, waiting, accepting. Silence descended upon the backyard, thick and heavy, broken only by Lily's ragged sobs and the distant chirp of oblivious birds returning to the edges of the property. The unnatural storm had vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The oak tree stood still, its leaves barely rustling, its massive form silhouetted against the now placid afternoon sky. The immediate, violent fret had receded, leaving behind an atmosphere not of peace, but of watchful waiting, a palpable tension that hummed just beneath the surface of the quiet. They had chosen appeasement. The box, the bones, the locket, all were returned to the earth beneath the mother oak. The disturbed soil patted down as gently as their trembling hands allowed. Whether it was truly accepted or merely tolerated, they couldn't know. The aftermath left deep scars. Sleep offered little respite for weeks, tainted by lingering echoes of the psychic assault, fragmented nightmares of Roots and sorrow. Lily stopped talking about Mr. Roots, but her relationship with the backyard, and the oak tree in particular, was forever changed. Gone was the childlike fascination or simple fear, replaced by a solemn, wary respect. She avoided going near the base of the tree, her gaze often flicking towards it with an understanding far beyond her years. Sometimes Sarah would see her leaving small, carefully chosen wildflowers on the grass near the disturbed patch of earth, a silent offering of her own. The area directly around the oak remained subtly blighted. New grass refused to take root where they had dug, leaving a patch of bare earth that seemed resistant to healing. The plants nearby remained stunted, forever leaning slightly away from the tree's shadow. Sometimes, Sarah thought the oak itself looked different, perhaps a little less vibrant in its canopy. Or was it paradoxically, unnervingly more vital, drawing some unseen sustenance from the appeased tragedy beneath? The house still groaned occasionally at night, and the faucet in the downstairs bathroom still dripped, though the water ran clear now. Small reminders that nothing was truly forgotten. They talked about moving, of course. The idea of leaving the house, the tree, the oppressive weight of its history behind was seductive. But the practicalities were daunting. They had sunk their savings, their hopes into this restoration, and beneath the practicality, a deeper, more complex feeling took root, a sense of obligation. They had unearthed the secret, felt the raw grief. Leaving felt like abandoning not just a house, but a responsibility, an uneasy guardianship they hadn't asked for, but now felt bound to maintain. They had disturbed the peace. Perhaps it was their duty to help keep it so. Life settled into a new, altered normality. They finished the essential restorations on the house, avoiding major work near the foundation closest to the tree. They learned to live with the faint tension in the backyard air, the knowledge of what lay buried beneath the oak. They hosted barbecues, planted a vegetable garden well away from the tree's influence, pushed Lily in the porch swing. They pretended, sometimes successfully, that they were just another family living their quiet country dream. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year later, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the golden light filter through the thinning leaves of the surrounding trees. The mother oak stood stark against the blue sky, its leaves mostly shed, its gnarled branches like skeletal fingers. Life seemed peaceful, blessedly ordinary. Then something caught her eye. A single large acorn detached itself from one of the highest branches of the oak. It fell straight down, plummeting towards the ground, near the patch of earth where they had dug, where Lily sometimes left her flowers. It landed not with a soft thump on the damp soil, but with a distinct, sharp crack. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon, sharp and deliberate. Sarah froze, her hand tightening on the window frame. Was it just an acorn falling, or was it something more? A reminder, an acknowledgement, a warning that the truce was conditional, the ancient power beneath the roots merely slumbering, forever watchful. She couldn't know. All she knew was that they lived here now, in the shadow of the mother oak, bound to the uneasy peace they had forged. The question wasn't just what was buried under the old oak tree anymore. It was what they had awakened, and whether it would ever truly sleep again. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.